All right, boys. Crusader Kings 3 is a game. It's been out for a while. I love how optimized it is. I love how beautiful the game is itself. I think the game has some severe issues with game mechanics. We've come a long way since release. The latest expansion was moving in a super positive direction. We've had a core game mechanic that's completely changed, such as feasts and hunts and pilgrimages. And now they've been reworked in a manner where they actually have a brand new mechanics of how they work in game. And for the most part, I think they work, for the most part, really well, which I think is a really good direction for Crusader Kings 3. Because once again, I think if expansions add new, what I call floating features that don't interact with the main base game and you can happily ignore, I think for the most part, those features are crap. And an example of that is the Royal Court. For the most part, you can play a game with Crusader Kings 3 and completely ignore all the Royal Court mechanics. You can actively say, I don't want to hold courts. You can actively not even put things up in your courtroom. And you can actively not even really care too much about the anemones, because for the most part, the points that you get, so the penalties you get for having low anemones aren't even a big deal anyway. The only time you can't ignore it is when you're forced into the throne room because someone's approached you and they want you for something urgent. But most of the time, they're all like court events and they're not very good anyway. So just to understand, a good feature is one that implements a part of the core game that you desperately need to be a part of. Otherwise, you can't really function the main game correctly. Most of the time, you have to deal with stress in Hoi 4, and the way you fix it is with hunts and feasts. Now, there are lots of easier ways to get rid of stress. You can get rid of stress with all the different tour events and activities as well. So these are core game mechanics. You have to take a part of them. There's no way you can optionally opt out, that you have to do them. And it's really nice that they've reworked the latest expansion. However, the bad features is where ones are kind of floating and they don't really interact very much or limited ways with the main core game mechanics, such as the Royal Court. Hence the reason why I think the latest expansion is really good. And the Royal Court, man, I'm not a big fan of it. I like the new items, but I think the Royal Court mechanics itself are pretty rubbish. I have written a list. This is a list. Oh, list meta. And these are things that the game is unbelievably severely lacking to make it a complete game experience. And if these elements were updated or reworked or implemented, the game would be exceptionally better in the long run. And I'm not coming here to diss and upset the Paradox developers for CK3. I'm not here to do that. I want a better game experience and I enjoy playing this game. However, I'm just feeling a little bit lost with the development from release all the way up to now, which I just don't feel like the game has progressed enough to make it a complete game experience. I'll admit one final footnote is some of the things I'm going to talk about, I haven't got solutions for them. Because one, I'm not a game developer, I'm not a coder, and I don't work for Paradox. I don't know why I have to keep saying that, but that's always a reoccurring theme that people always ask me. I have expectation with Crusader Kings 3 that the devs are kind of smart enough to know how to fix their said game. First of all, let's talk about problems that players have with the game that limits new players to play the game and enjoy the experience more. And one of the biggest elements that people complain about in CK3 that ruins their experience, that needs to be improved upon to implement features to enhance players' experience with this feature and management of that said feature, is successions. How many times, guys, have you heard someone play CK3 and say the succession system is bad, I don't like it, and whenever I have someone die who's influential and I've connected with, and then I have to succeed and break up my realm, and then I quit out the game? I don't know. I feel like I've heard that quite a few times. So there needs to be a system as a part of succession that you can now offer land and make deals and make negotiations within your own nation to how land is divvied up within your own realm. So right now, the way succession works is just plain old simple. It's just a matter of dividing all of the titles among your children, and then you can adjust how the law partitions them as such. And for instance, high partition is where the vast majority goes to the eldest male in most cases. Eventually moving towards primogeniture, which is basically OP mode, where you just win the game in that respect. To be fair, you could argue that primogeniture is too OP, and some of these penalties here could be significantly more higher. Paradox have kind of hinted on this when they went into the regent system here, which allows you to have a power sharing agreement with a regent that stands in for you when you may not be around. And to be fair, I thought this was going to be the partition rework, but it's not. And yeah, we're still left with the system where it's just kind of arbitrary how land is divided on succession. And it'd be kind of cool if you had more options to be able to offer favors to different children, to maybe negotiate them away from taking said titles, or limit the amount of titles they have in total. So for instance, they may be happier to take a single title on succession, like one count, instead of taking a vast majority of your realm when they succeed, to just create a system that might not be as upsetting for you. It's funny because, in a way, factions, which were one of the other issues people had issues with in game, have been mostly fixed. So now you can do a new activity, a new tour called the Grand Tour, and you can either intimidate your vassals or boost relations with them by having parties with them to try and convince them to get out of factions. And it is a simple way of fixing factions. That one of the game's mechanics that people struggled with had a new feature and reworked and implemented to try and help players fix the faction issues that they're having. And the example of Grand Tours is an example of that. So once again, I'm just asking for something that allows successions to be a little bit easier for your realm, so therefore people don't have to suffer from the idea of losing loads of titles on succession and having to build your realm from the ground up again. And anything that takes away any anxiety for the player or removes fun from the player, obviously is not something that should be in the game. So I think that should be desperately reworked. Next up, painting the map. I feel like it's a feature that Paradox have actively tried to discourage. This is about an internal political simulator. And if you do want to be Alexander the Great, you do have the option to do that, but there's no consequence of doing that. So, for instance, if I, as England, wanted to be the conqueror of conquerors and become Alexandra 2.0, and I started to go on holy wars against France and the Holy Roman Empire and take full-blown kingdom titles, when I take all this land, nobody cares. Of course, I get issues inside of the new land that I've taken with unrest for different religions and maybe new vassals that potentially really don't like me. Sure, that's the internal politics, and I kind of understand that element. But externally, outside of your aim, internationally, nobody gives a fuck. Nobody cares. You know, and there needs to be some kind of infamy or coalition system in game to deter this mass expansion, and maybe even create a snowball effect where basically the world or the continent is against you for the actions that you've done. It feels a lot of the time when you work towards Kingdom Holy Wars as a part of, well, one of them is one of the traditions, isn't it? It's the meta of everyone plays at the moment, where you have unlimited Kingdom Holy Wars and every player works towards this said goal. Oh, I found it. Here we go. By the sword. There is no limit to the number of kingdom level holy wars that can be declared by one player. And it's almost like the Paradox developers have kind of known how OP this is, because look, they've added penalties to it. You lose diplomacy, which obviously damages relations. You lose a massive amount of piety, and you also have different faiths that just desperately hate you. But once again, I think there needs to be implement a full-blown coalition system with this. Now, if you're a map painter, that's cool. But one of the issues sometimes is mid to late game, when your army becomes so unbelievably strong and you just keep rolling over a continent with whole Kingdom Holy Wars, no one ever stops you and no one ever really cares. And it kind of feels like there's something missing to the game. You spend so much love and attention building up this massive army through generation after generation, but your army never really gets fully contested. What I'm asking for is, with a coalition system and multiple kingdoms go to war with you, because you have so much bad boy points, you get to test out the strength of your super cool army that you built. And it kind of becomes a point mid-game that every player plays to, where their army is so undefeatable because no one can get the numbers or the quality of the army to defeat you, that you kind of get a little bit bored. And it just adds that kind of mid-game to late-game flavor to allow players to continue to play, because they'll actually get contested with their massive death stack army. I feel like at some point they're going to release a DLC that's going to be called something like Legends or Great Kings or something like that, where you will be able to declare yourself of something like somehow an ancestor of Caesar or Alexander, similar in CK2, you know? However, if that system gets implemented, which allows you to like go on mad conquest, there needs to be a counter system of coalitions to be able to stand against you, basically cut you down to size style mechanics. Something that is incentivized, that if someone defeats this great ruler that's gone on this mass blitzkrieg, if you defeat them, you get a lot of prestige. You are the defeater of Napoleon. You are the defeater of Alexander the Great, for instance. You are the defeater of Charlemagne. So there is an incentive for players to stop this legendary ruler from going on these mad conquests. And if you are the one who finally puts the dagger or the sword into Charlemagne or Caesar, you will be given a massive amount of prestige for stopping that holy ruler. Once again, a coalition system is desperately needed in CK3 because once you snowball, there is nothing stopping you. There is nothing stopping you. And that would be a good system just to slow down that expansion and give you an incentive to stop other players who are going on those mad, crazy conquests. Okay, a little bit of remnants of CK2 here. And I'll admit the button in CK2 didn't really work very well. It was the button to redistribute tiles. One of the biggest issues you get in Crusader Kings 3 is that when you do any major conquests, it becomes a bit of a chore to redistribute tiles. I understand this is an functional part of your realm to understand the internal politics to redistribute your tiles in the right order. And for the most part, it's nowhere near as bad as it was in CK2, because in CK3, you can just click and bold a bunch of them and just throw them out to one set person if you want to, and you were desperate. However, in CK3, it becomes a mass chore. I'll give you an example. When you play as William the Bastard, and let's say you conquer Britain. I mean, this is a mild example. There's really worse cases than this one. And you're left in a situation where you've got all these tiles to distribute, which, once again, I understand this is a functional part of the game to be able to hand out tiles strategically. But there are some instances mid to late game. Once again, I'm always focused on mid to late game because that's the part of the game that I feel like is missing the most. But I just feel like you need an option in decisions to redistribute tiles. And you can make it more advanced than Crusader Kings 2. You can make it the option to say only give out one title to one individual. Make it show it's random characters that are of a certain culture if you want. So you can encourage spreading that said culture, for instance, by clicking on these top two buttons here. Once again, loads of different filters, an option to automate that said system just to take off the edge from mid to late game when you are doing mad conquest. And to be fair, once again, I want to play more late game. Oh, God, I hate this part because I want to play more late game CK3. But when you reach the snowball phase, the incentive just drops off and it becomes world conquest time. And I feel like the clicks get so overly intense and you just want to focus on playing the game. Now, I understand this is a role-play game. However, I min-max it. It's what I enjoy. It's what I prefer, okay? Don't tell me what I can't enjoy. Once again, I like chocolate. You guys might like vanilla. We're just different. I min-max. And in that case, when I'm min-maxing and I'm doing my mass conquest, having to distribute all these tiles is just mad cumbersome. There are worse examples than this, actually. I feel like I've done some, like, kingdom titles side of the HRE, and when you conquer them and you're given, like, 50 titles to redistribute, it is a little bit excessive and it is a little bit too much. Once again, I'm just asking for a little bit of that mid to late game optimization just to take away some of that edge off from doing more of the chore-like activities in game. One thing I loved about Crusader Kings 3 when I very first played it was that the music was awesome. I loved to be able to fight a holy war and hear the holy war music, being that it was so unbelievably intense. I think that's one thing about CK3 that does really well. The world itself, the sound effects to events and whatnot, and the music that is reactive to the gameplay is unbelievably fantastic. The big however, though, is the holy war example. So when you do a holy war in Crusader Kings 3, you get the holy war music. See if we can actually get it to play the music, because once again, it's been a while since I've had music turned on. I usually turn it off as a content creator. And I think the holy war music is insanely intense. It is fantastic. However, the downside to it is whenever you do any size of holy war, whether it be for a count, a duchy, or a kingdom, the holy war music plays every single time. See, if I do, I'm not sure if this is even applicable anymore. And I can't even believe, in a way, that this actually managed to get through to the final stage of the game. But the Holy War music is so unbelievably intense, and it's so atmospheric, and it so sucks you in the game. But the problem is it plays way too often. It should only fire when you do a Kingdom Holy War to kind of suck you into the immersion of how unbelievably epic this war is. And I just think it's an awful shame that that music gets so overused to the stage where you actually start to hate it, when I thought it was one of the most awesome parts of the game. For some reason, I'm not able to do a Holy War. I don't know why. It won't even let me do it, so I can't even show you the music and show you how intense it is. But if you played CK3 enough, you understand it is a really cool music track that plays. But for some reason, I don't know why, maybe they like the music so much, they wanted you to hear it every single time you did a Holy War. And it's almost comical way. If you do chain back-to-back count Holy Wars over and over and over again, you hear the music start over and over and over again. And it's just, it's a little bit like, where's the attention to detail there, you know? Surely someone should have spotted that and been like, no, that's not, it shouldn't be firing that frequently. Once again, I'm not against it firing. I'm just against the idea of it firing every single time, of no matter how minuscule the war is. It needs to fire for big wars, basically, to feel the epicness of the said music that actually does fire. And it would be kind of cool if other wars had the level of epicness that that war music has, but with other different kinds of wars too. Maybe you would have different music depending on the reason you actually goes to war as well. So for instance, there could be a war music specifically for pushing de jure. I mean, it's a bit of a reach really, because once again, it wouldn't need to be that unbelievably epic music, but it would be really kind of cool to have that ambient music that plays based upon what you actively are doing in game. It's just something that I noticed that was really freaking cool, but for the most part, I just felt like it was kind of overall lacking in game. Yeah, dynamic music. Definitely for a war, for an invasion too, that should play some unbelievably epic music. And when you hear this music, you almost feel intense and engrossed in the game, because it's like, whoa, this mad event's happening, and it could actually risk my entire realm falling apart if I lose this war. And it would really immerse the player and make them feel connected to the said events that are actually happening in game. At the end of the day, immersion is super popular. Immersion is super important for games that are roleplay based, because you need that player to feel immersed in this experience of this event that's actually happening, and music is a really easy way of doing that. Okay, so I understand I'm a min-maxer, and I know that's not for everyone, and I understand this is a roleplay game, and I have to put the pillow down before I push you onto it, but I need to just preface it what I'm doing, because I know if I talk about min-maxing too much, the role players are going to get mad angry at me and like, no, you're playing the game the wrong way. And I understand we all play the game differently because we enjoy different things. Okay, that's out of the way. What I want to acknowledge is there's an issue with lifestyle traits. And I think the problem with them is they're a little bit linear, because I personally think health and learning and fertility shouldn't all be in whole of body. So fertility isn't the one. It's mainly learning and health and illnesses that are all in Scholar, all in the learning lifestyle perks. And I feel like these lifestyle trees should be less linear. Why is there no health in stewardship? Surely if you're wealthy, you've got access to loads of food and different varieties of food that improve your nutrition. So in that case, shouldn't this boost your health to a certain degree? You're a military man in Marshall. You're always exercising. You're always outdoors. You are an active man all the time. Why doesn't Marshall boost my health? What is also good for your mental health and good for stress? Talking to people. Talking about your action, talking about what's going on around you. Why doesn't diplomacy reduce my stress levels? The biggest issue I find with this is that they all overlap to a certain degree. I get that part. It just feels really annoying that if I want health, I have to fucking do whole of body. And it creates a situation where I'm always min-maxing every single game by going for whole of body to try and live the longest, therefore hold on to my realm for the longest and try and make the most actions to my realm, make the most money overall. It always goes the same way. Money is super important, so I always go down this path. And then I'm like, well, I want to live a long time, so I always want to go down whole of body. The biggest issue with this is the just lack of variety of the different paths, and they're all super linear. Okay, diplomacy is diplomacy, martial is martial, stewardship is money, intrigue is crap, learning is about health and piety. I feel like they're so unbelievably linear, and they need to be made unbelievably more broad. This lifestyle perk tree and the traits and XP and stuff you get from it need to be made so unbelievably more broad. Even before, if you get certain perks, they gain extra buffs if you get a different trait on a different path. So for instance, this is a weird example. Diablo 2, if you were to unlock the very last perk as a part of a tree, it would give an added bonus that would work in synergy with another bonus. Or even a better example, EU4. You know, like when you gain the final idea, it gives a bonus if you've completed it to another perk, so they work in synergy with any others. It will just encourage players to mix and match different traits, to actively play a more varied character, and discouraging min-maxing in game. I actively, every time I want to play Crusader Kings 3, I want to go down like a martial path to make a warrior. But you can make the best warrior in the freaking world, and then he dies at the age of 62 because you didn't go for whole of body. That destroys me, actively destroys me. There should be more of an incentive to go down different paths to boost all of my stats overall. And for instance, it seems really silly to me that the stewardship path doesn't boost diplomacy. You're actively a wheeler and dealer. You're actively working with money and working with people. You've got the gift of the gab. It's a British phrase, meaning you've got the gift of being able to speak to other people. Once again, there's a severe balancing issue with lifestyle perks, and the fact that the lifestyle perks don't work in synergy with one another is a massive missed opportunity. these need to be come back and looked at. One of the big issues with Paradox games is some of these core features of the game never really get looked at until they get reworked, which is really sad in a way. Once again, I need an incentive to be a diplomat other than August for prestige, or stewardship path to make money, or whole body to get lots of health. There needs to be more diversity. That's it, guys. Feedback Gaming is pro-diversity. In the chat. Oh, man. This is a biggie, and this ruins my experience too. So I actively hate and detest when I'm presented with events that are just complete rubbish. Okay, there's two issues going on here. One, being presented with an event that you've seen 100 times before in this said game, but then secondly, presented with an event that's just absolutely pointless. I always use the Crusader Kings 2 example. Crusader Kings 2, you're an emperor. You literally control half of the fucking Europe. You're a massive king of kings, emperor of emperors. You are a living god. And you get an event about a cat up a tree for a peasant in some random count that you don't even have direct control over. And I'm like, why am I seeing this event? This event is so below me. There should be events tiered based upon my rank. And if I'm an emperor, I shouldn't be hearing about some random witch trial that's happening in a title that I don't even own, or the other side of my realm. Why am I hearing about this event? I mean, it comes back to events as a whole. In CK3, not only do you see the same events over and over again, but they fire way too frequently in a set time period. And it almost just gets in the way of what you're currently already doing. I am a 30 martial leader leading my army for a kingdom title. Why am I getting events talking about my mistress and how she's having a fallout with my wife? I just don't care. Why is this information relevant to what I'm currently doing? Now, I will admit there are lots of issues with CK3 when it comes down to events, because there are a lack of them. And I think you only really get enough events when you've got like 10 DLCs with, for instance, like CK2 has, where it actually had such a big diversity of different events. But I think there's definitely something that needs to be addressed when it comes down to how many events repeat over and over again in the lifetime of said ruler. My fix for this would be don't show the event for a king in their lifetime more than once. Set like a cap on just, you can't see this event happen again within either a game session, a lifetime, or of a ruler. There needs to be some physical cap on it. I showed you an example in my review for one of the last CK3 expansions where I kept getting this same event from a moldy ship that you were traveling on. And I had the event fire twice on one pilgrimage. And I was just like, that's just one time too many. And it also comes down to two, when you play in the game, you sometimes get an event pop up in the middle of the screen saying an alliance has been formed. I mean, I just did a royal marriage. I know the alliance formed because I made it myself. It was my choice, okay? So for instance, I'll give you an example. I'm going to make a royal marriage here for this gentleman here. Send the proposal. So why am I told this twice? I've had an alliance formed at the top of my screen. And I've also been informed that the marriage has gone through and I've got an alliance. Why do I need to inform this multiple times? It just basically means the game becomes overly spammy. One, I did it, and I knew I did it because that's why I did it, because I wanted the marriage. Then I get told about the marriage at the top of the screen and told about the alliance at the top of the screen. And three, I get another pop-up in the middle of the screen telling me that the alliance and the marriage has been formed. Why are you telling me 3 times of this one event that's actually happened? I mean, you could argue it's twice. I'll admit that it's twice. But the third time is when I actively clicked it, because I actually did that action. So why is it letting me know so many times? And sometimes the events and the pop-ups in CK3 are just way too spammy, and they need to be dialed down massively. It almost feels like one of the issues is because they've got rid of the log at the bottom of the screen that's not in CK3, is they need some way to let you know that always something has always happened. Isn't there a log on the right side? No, there is a log on the right side too. There's like pop-ups on the right, isn't there? Yeah, there's this event log on the right-hand side as well. Look, this has gained 1 extra night. I don't understand the priority system sometimes, like why it appears on the top bit, why it appears an event in the center with only one option, and sometimes why does it appear in the log on the right-hand side? Once again, I do feel like there's just way too many pop-ups in this game, and it needs to be dialed down massively because it ruins the pacing and the flow of the game. When you wanted to play at a decent rate, when you're spammed with these events that you've seen a million times before that are really mundane, and then simultaneously you're spammed with all these events on the right-hand side as well. I would argue that from a role-playing perspective, these events are really important because, once again, it tells you the status of your game and lets you know your connections to your players. But once again, I feel like if you actively want to hear about these said people, you should mark them as eventful people and people you need to hear about by pinning them to the top here. I feel like the game should incentivize you to find these said people, to find about the said events, other than just being spammed with events in your face of, well, I guess it must be important to you because that's what you just did. Another one is creating a religion and culture is super fun, but the problem is there's no real way of spreading it. And that sounds kind of strange. In the olden days, you used to be able to abduct people, then convert them to your religion and send them back. And it'd be a kind of cool thing is to see the realm fall apart. It was mad OP and it was really broken, but you'd always do it with Byzantium. You'd abduct the ruler, convert them to whatever religion you are, and then send them back. And then they'd try and either convert or they'd have a civil war and it'd collapse in on itself. And it was a really fun thing to do because it was a way of spreading your religion and your culture to another part of the world. Well, religion, not culture. And I feel like there needs to be more events baked into the game of the idea of map painting and spreading said cultures or said religions around the map. And it's really a fun mechanic to create your own culture. It is a fun mechanic to create your own religion, but there aren't really many mechanics that are the idea of spreading it or using your money to spread that religion to that said reason, maybe to create disorder, for instance. I understand it's a difficult thing to do. It's something that probably didn't really happen in historical, but it just needs more events and flavor and a way to spend your money or your influence to make people convert either religion or culture to said nations around the world. And the fact there's a lack of those events just really, it feels like building up to the event of changing your religion is so cool because you have to work towards it. But when you reach that said point, it's either like, well, you're either going to get you're either going to get crusaded by everyone else who isn't your religion, and that's kind of it. And you kind of spread it internally, but you never get the way to spread it externally. I suppose there's probably an expansion pack there in future. The idea of having more options internationally to work with other nations other than just focusing on internal politics. Oh man, this is my biggie. This is my super biggie. I hate the way dueling works. I think it's rubbish. I think in CK2 it was actually better. It was just a system where you presented with an event, and with this event you have the option to fight that said person, and for the most part the person who had the most prowess had the highest chance of winning. But this stupid event change where it makes it this back and forth game is just not fun. I just don't think it's very good. Once again, each to our own. You guys might be a big fan of it, but I never do duels because I find them incredibly painful to go through, and I never do chess games because I also find them unbelievably annoying as well. I hate doing them and they're not very good. There needs to create a mini game inside of the game with like a health bar or something, so you give up more visualization of actually what's happening, and maybe some kind of skill-based gamer based around that. Once again, you do the chess game, you do the duel once, you never want to touch them again because those game mechanics are just plain old bad. It's less about immersion, it's less about role play, it's more about just plain old fun, and I don't find them fun. I don't find them very good. If you agree with me, let me know. I might have a minority opinion, but honestly, hand on heart, I think the duel system is just rubbish and it needs to be reworked. Maybe there could be a rule setting game to say simplified duels, just to go back to the old system and not have to deal with this 50 event chain of all these bloody events about, oh, I threw coins at him or something. Oh god, these events are rubbish. Roleplay is fun. However, having goals to work towards, a bit like in Sims, would make the game a lot better. So for instance, if this said king has an ambition of forming a kingdom tile and he fulfills that kingdom tile, he's rewarded. And with these little mini goals you've got for your rulers, it gives you an incentive to work towards these said goals. It's almost a little bit like mission trees, but the game's incentivized to play sandbox and just kind of play along as you go, you know? And I think for the most part, the game needs just a little bit of hand-holding, a little bit of direction, and a little bit more of an incentive to fulfill short-term goals of like either converting religion or counties, for instance, and also fulfilling said goals based on personality traits. I have a feeling the game's going to go in that direction eventually, but it feels really hollow to me in a way that you might have a guy who's ambitious. You don't really have any ambitions other than what the player chooses to do. So I guess you've got to roleplay them and make them up in your head. But it would be kind of cool if it was like in Sims where they had an actual ambition and you could actually see what they're aiming towards and what they're actually going for. And it would actually encourage the AI to be a little bit more active overall. And then you could bake that in as well by giving you rewards for filling the said short-term or long-term goals. You're having a short-term goal like having 3 babies, or a long-term goal of forming a kingdom tile or something like that. Oceans are boring. They're just like a hollow space with nothing going on it. There are limited events around oceans. There's no resources for oceans. They're just something you move across automatically when you move your armies. These spare gold over them. I don't even know how you would enhance this one. This is where I'm a bit blank, but for the most part, oceans in CK3 are just unbelievably boring, and they don't serve any purpose as a part of the greater part of the game. How do you enhance that or make people care about that? It is going to be really difficult. But overall, oceans just don't serve any purpose other than just a terrain that you have to move over by spending money and buying ships. I feel like even Crusader Kings 2 had more function of oceans than in CK3, because at least then you could buy ships with them and deploy the ships and move those ships over set tiles. But right now, this is just like a highway. It's the highway of Crusader Kings 3 for moving armies around, and that's the only purpose this game actually serves. I suppose it's gained an extra bit of purpose now recently because you can use it as an activity to move over, and there's events linked to that. But overall, for the most part, the oceans are incredibly lonely, and they don't really suffer from any functionality other than what's already in the game. I mentioned earlier about factions, and I do like that they've added extra options of activities. And I'll admit, I wrote this down prior to the release of this expansion because I wasn't prepared for what changes were coming. So I wrote down factions are frustrating and need to be able to negotiate different solutions. And I think I like that to be expanded upon. I love that they've added grand tours, but you can only do a grand tour every set period of time, I think every 10 years. So if you're in a situation with a bad faction, you can't really do a grand tour. So it would really be nice if there was ways of negotiating, which is what Crusader Kings is all about. It's all about internal politics, working with other people, compromising. But there really isn't many options, you know, for factions inside of your nation. And at that point, you're just left up to shifting counts underneath of dukes, throwing money at them to boost their relations. There really isn't much negotiation that really happens as a part of factions. So I don't know, I like that part of the game to be enhanced apart. I suppose it could be very similar to the partition system, really, where you would add more options and flexibilities to undergo your succession as a part of the game. I do feel like CK3 is moving in that direction because the way this regent system works is the way you can use tools to move power around and try and get favors from people is kind of the direction they're trying to go with it. I feel like this area could be advanced upon, and there could be more flexibility with this as it works with partitions, as it could work with factions as well. I mentioned earlier about floating DLC features. This is something that every map game suffers from at some point or another. I know EU4's had a few expansions a bit like this. It's really important whenever they add new DLC that it is integrated and intertwined with the main game to a very large degree. Not just a little tiny bit of overlap, massively intertwined with the base game, meaning you can't ignore that mechanic because it's intertwined with the base game. And the Royal Court is an example of a feature that you can quite happily ignore and play a normal game of Crusader Kings 3. And I think that's rubbish. Once again, I feel like it needs to be overly intertwined with the game itself. I think the way I would take it to a next extreme is court enmities. If you drop below the minimum threshold, you can actually have an issue of your nation actually disintegrates. I know that sounds extreme, but you need to have a functioning game for the player needs to care about these said mechanics. And it shouldn't just be flat bonuses for doing said things. You need to have an actual crisis within your nation. If your court, if you believe your king isn't worthy of sitting on the throne, and then your vassals may attempt to overthrow you or disintegrate your entire nation based upon that. Because right now, the Royal Court is unfortunately a really poopy mechanic. I will say one thing as well is I do think grand tournaments don't really intertwine very well with the base game as well. Sure, they enhance the diplomacy aspects and the RP elements, but once again, other than prestige and stress loss and getting a few nice funky items, you can play a nice game of CK3, conquer the world if that's your objective, try and build the biggest prestige and piety possible, and quite happily ignore grand tournaments. In fact, they're just kind of a distraction. I would like to see them more intertwined, and maybe it would benefit you more as a player to be a worthy king and your vassals to love you if you did more grand tournaments, which to a certain degree they do overlap a little bit, but I would like to see more of an overlap there. Last but not least, teaching children in CK3 is a pain in the fucking ass. I'm not asking for the complete rework of this system. I understand raising children is a handful, you know, and the events associated with it give you stress. And I think that for the most part, that's a reasonable way of handling that mechanic. However, I think it needs to be automated a little bit. And I think there needs to be like a tool that you just say, all new children need to be trained under a certain martial state. Like even select this as a default button almost, unless you choose to override it as such, like this is your default button to have it. Because I think the process of like having kids and having to keep going into the menu to assign them an education focus is just a chore. It's just too much work. Now, I'm not against the personality trait stuff. And for the mentor stuff, you could set like a state mentor almost that would teach all the kids. I think at a certain degree that doesn't that already exist? The court tutor, but it's not the same thing as a mentor, is it? As the study child language interaction. So what I would say is for paying money in game, it would automatically teach kids to a certain path and a certain culture or a certain religion based upon the one you set it as. The fact that this has to be manually signed over and over and over again, once again, I just think it's a little bit of a chore, and I feel like there needs to be some level of automation so you can enjoy these mechanics more. Because every game I play the same way. I get to a certain point in game, and I'm like, I am not manually teaching my kids anymore, and I'm not assigning them as an educator or a mentor anymore, or assigning their career path, because I just feel like it's too much of a claw. It's just too many clicks, and there just needs to be automation in game to just take some of the fuss out of those excess clicks. They're just not very fun. Now, don't get me wrong, if it's your direct heir, your first child, you want first-hand support and directing that child towards the said goal that you want for their traits, for their career, for their personality. That's important. I get that part. But when you're on to your 12th grandchild, at that point, it's like, Christ almighty, this is a lot of fucking clicks for very little reward. Boom. I'm sorry, guys. This video went on for way too long. I like to think I'm speaking to the devs here. And if they hear this, I like to think they can make a better game. Because the reason I'm making this video is because I love CK3 and I want to make a better game experience overall. And I think it desperately needs that love. The Empire title feels empty. Whoa, that's so true. That's true. Going from a count to a duke is meaningful because it increases your vassal limit. You can shift people underneath you, so it's got a new rank of title as such. And then you go to a kingdom title, you gain the royal courts. But when you go from kingdom to an empire, there's no functionality. It is basically just a medal that you put on your shirt. Damn, that's so true. Now, okay, there's a few things. You gain a lot of prestige. It's a higher rank than the kingdom, so you can have kingdoms below you. You gain extra levies, men at arms. However, actual game mechanics and features, there's nothing. Where would you go from there, though? What would an empire title give you? I feel like it might actually give you more functionality for your counselors, maybe. Or maybe it would unlock 2 new council members. Oh, shit. You know, like you could in CK2, you gained advisors. And the advisors did some, like, reoccurring role within the back of your nation as such. That would actually be kind of cool. That would actually be cool. It goes without saying as well, I really hate this UI as well. This was the massive scroll wheel, and these court titles don't have pictures next to them or anything. They're just bunches of text that you spend money and gain a flat bonus. This system is awful. It needs to be looked at again, because right now it's not very UI concise. I think they have reduced the UI size a little bit. But for the most part, I just don't really like this system. Oh, and I really hate this as well. You scroll all the way down, you assign someone, and it scrolls you all the way back to the top again. Oh, I hate that so much. It's such a bad UI decision. Why did you make me scroll all the way back then? Keep me where I was looking at. Oh! Victoria 3 does that in a few areas as well. And I feel like you don't really gain much relations for this. Plus 10 is really rubbish to say how much money you're inserting into their bank account. Anyway, guys, is there anything with Crusader Kings 3 that needs improving? Anything you really don't like? Please let me know in the comments below. And if you want more content, you know where to find it. There's one right here, and this one has been cherry-picked and selected just for you. And YouTube, it knows what you love, so give it a click.